Hey, welcome to the Business and Society podcast. I'm your host, Senthil. Every fortnight, we explore diverse ideas about business and society with leading thinkers and practitioners. In this episode, we are exploring how corporate philanthropy is evolving in a world where sustainability and social responsibility are critical. My guest today is Dario Soto-Abril. Dario is the executive director of the Trafigura Foundation, a corporate philanthropy focused on climate adaptation. Earlier, Dario has led international organizations focused on social and economic inclusion, climate action, and public private partnerships, including Fair Trade International, the Water Partnership, and the Trust for the Americas. Dario, warm welcome to the podcast, and such a delight to have you with me today.
Senthil, thank you so much for the invite, and it's the honor and the delight is mine.
Um, Dario, I know you are from Colombia. Reflecting on your career, you moved to the United States, went to Harvard, worked for an organization there, then moved to Germany to lead another nonprofit. You moved to Sweden to lead another nonprofit. Now you're talking from Switzerland, Geneva. Um, what are your reflections looking back on this international career, particularly in a world where nationalism is on the rise? How easy is it for you, from your background, to move around the world and lead such organizations that has footprints across the world?
I think that the world has changed quite a lot since I joined or I decided to go into international development 25 years ago. We used to be a more focus on multilateralism and collective action and believe in countries coming together with solutions. I think the world has changed since then. Now in 2025, it seems that we are more into a bilateral kind of relationships, and it's trade as the force that move things forward. So to me, moving around has been moving also with those different times. I think one of the constants for me has been that I never forget where I come from. I come from Colombia, as you said. I never forget that I grew up in a country that was, for most of its history, still now in civil war. And I feel like that deep connection with with the communities, with the responsibility that I have for people who do not have the privilege to being able to study, to work, to move around, as you put it forward. So in all of my work jobs, I've carried that with me, despite the fact that political and business kind of approaches have evolved over time. So that to me is what keeps me grounded through all these different changes. And yes, it's been a quite interesting career because, as you said, moving from the US and where I was doing work at the intersection of nonprofit and international organizations, then moving to Europe and experience a different culture, a different approach to things. I found the European culture quite different from the US one, even in development. And it's been such a learning and quite a good journey. I've enjoyed so far.
Let's get into corporate philanthropy. There are so many organizations in the world that work on sustainable development, right? Governments, businesses, um, grant making organizations. What makes corporate philanthropy unique? What is its value proposition?
First, I feel that is the intersection of business and development and working on the ground. I think businesses really are a force for good, for change when they are purpose driven. In addition to, you know, making a profit and having returns for the shareholders. I think corporate philanthropy is this expression of the feeling of giving back to the communities, the feeling of needed to do beyond the business approach, the for-profit approach. So to me, that's one of the key differentiator with, let's say, a nonprofit that does its own fundraising, or an endowed foundation that is not related to a big corporate. No, that you have that intersection, that knowledge, that background, that connection with businesses, but you also have that connection with the development world, with the communities where you operate, with the needs. So I think to me that makes it unique. No, that makes it such a rich experience because you have the best of the different worlds and also the tensions of all these worlds coming together.
So you bring the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
One way a commoner like me visualize corporate philanthropy is You sit with this pot of money on a checkbook and choose to give that money away to organizations which you admire, or just doing a work that impresses organizations such as yours. Is it that simple, or what goes behind the curtain?
When I joined, I had that perception. I joined corporate philanthropy 3 years ago, and well into not well into when I was 50. Now I'm 53, and I came into, okay, there's money to do good. Every day I've learned that is much more. I would say the structure is fluid, but it's a structure, because you do have an enormous responsibility to pick the best programs, the initiatives that create the most impact. One, because the money is not ours. The money is the money from the corporate. And any company, the main purpose of a company is create profit. And this is money that could be distributed among shareholders, but they decided to put it into doing good and make a change, positive change in the world. That comes with an inherent responsibility for me and my team to actually pick the best initiative. So that's one element. The other one is that there are so many organizations out there doing great work, that picking those that are outstanding, that are aligned with what we want to do, is also terrific responsibility and a great opportunity to learn every day. I think one of the beauties with corporate philanthropy is that you really focus on the impact, and you can really focus on learning. And that's what makes it so rich, so unique. So it's not about just giving money away, like probably that was the initial focus 20, 30 years ago, where corporate philanthropy was about doing work that it was very grassroots, very give money away. But now it's very structured, and we do take it very seriously. We take a lot of time scoping, meeting partners, going to the field. We have a very structured due diligence. So for us, it's a huge responsibility, and we have a board that is very demanding on us doing this very professionally, because again, the funding is scarce, the funding for development, so we have to invest it the best way possible.
So, as you said, there are so many organizations that are doing great work there. Understood. When making those choices, what are some of the qualities you look for, or any corporate philanthropy, not just your organization, look for in selecting who to fund?
Well, first, it start with us, what we want to aspire to be. In our case, the Trafigura Foundation. We want our funding, which is limited. It's not a lot of money. We're not a huge philanthropy. So we want our funding to be catalytic, meaning that it really creates and propel a change. It's not just giving money for doing the same all over the place. We want it to be additional, which means that it adds value to efforts that were ongoing either by the same organization that community, or different places. So that catalyticness and additionality guides what we aim to do. It's not regular grant making where you just keep doing the same all over the place. We are very intentional selecting organizations where they tell us your funding is going to be able, for example, to bring other donors to the table. So as I told you, we are corporate philanthropy. The funding is not that large, but has this flexibility where if, for example, I invest 1 million or I put 1 million into an NGO, they tell me, listen, your million is going to be used to unlock 10 million from an international development bank, or 10 million for a commercial investor. So that's one element of how is it catalytic. The other one is it's aimed to take risk. Many more traditional structured donors, they aim for more conservative approaches where it's proven methodology that yields X result over time. With us, it's more like, okay, what can accelerate impact? What is innovative? What can you do different? And even if it fails, we learn. Now, we don't go there trying to fail, but we acknowledge that taking risk, meaning that there's a chance for failure. So that comes from us. And what we look in our partners is that element of innovation, that element of being able to attract others, that element of taking risk, but very measured risk, but risk nonetheless. And also the connection with the local communities. We do want to make sure that the funding reaches the communities on whose behalf is being fundraised. And we also want to make sure that all initiatives are co-created with those that are to be quote unquote their beneficiaries. No, we do not favor initiatives that are developed in London or in New York, where where it has no reality with a community in the Amazon or in Kenya or in Indonesia. So we have these elements of community involvement, being catalytic, being additional, but also making sure that the ideas are innovative and will attract and will grow over time, are scalable, and could grow with other funders as well.
Interesting. And how do corporate philanthropic organizations choose on the areas they want to work on? For example, when I was doing research for this interview about your organization, one of the things which came out very clear is all you're concerned about is climate adaptation. So, how do the sector in general makes these decisions?
I believe, and I can only speak from my experience with the Trafigura Foundation, is both the relation with the parent organization, which is really committed to addressing the effects of climate change in the different communities where the group Trafigura operates and beyond. Um, and it's also through an analysis that we did where were the biggest gaps in funding. So when we decided to work into climate adaptation and resilience, we did analyze the fact that climate change overall is demanding a lot of funding and a lot of effort. But in the different areas of climate change, let's say mitigation and adaptation has traditionally been the most underfunded. And then, remember, climate mitigation deals with the causes of climate change, so meaning decarbonization, reducing greenhouse gases, etc. Adaptation is about the effects. So what's going to happen with agriculture in the future? What is going to happen with the coral reefs or the mangroves in the future? How can we find the most resilient variety of crops or most resilient variety of mangroves, trees, coral reefs, etc.? What is going to happen to the communities that live in coastal areas? How are we going to address the increased heat? So we found that these themes were emerging, are quite a top priority for many of the countries, or I would say the majority of the countries, low and middle income ones. But the funding was very limited. It's estimated that the adaptation gap a year is around $300 billion. It's only around $26 billion that is being covered so far. And philanthropy overall only puts around 500 million, or so it's tiny, tiny. So we came into this with the idea of, okay, let's address a pressing topic for the world, but also let's address the fact that the financing is quite short. So we need to be very innovative in making sure that our funding, which is limited, will really be catalytic, will really unlock other funding, will really drive other philanthropies and corporates to invest on this topic. So that's how we pick climate adaptation and resilience.
Interesting. So you talked about this billions of dollars. When we read news or articles, one of the metric that's often presented in the philanthropic sector is this billionaire gave away $6 billion for this foundation or this cause. How do you measure impact? Is it just the money invested or it goes beyond that?
We measure impact by the increased resilience of those communities that are receiving or are participating in the initiative that we fund. So what is more resilience? More resilience could be people who have better jobs or who have been able to transition to new jobs that are going to be more profitable and more salient in a new economy where climate has changed, where climate has evolved. We measure also the resilience in terms of how, for example, I gave you some examples. How crops are going to be more resilient. How can they withstand more dryness or more acidity in the rain, or how can you have coral reefs that are sustaining more or are more resilient to the bleaching. As the temperature of the sea raises, there's a correlation with the bleaching of the coral reefs, and some of them are dying. So how can they be more resilient? So we track these kind of things over time. I must be honest that with climate adaptation, unlike climate mitigation, the measuring is quite tough because there are too many agreed KPIs or ways to measure it, but not a universal one. There's plenty of taxonomies. There are plenty of ways to measure by governments, by nonprofits. So we're also doing an effort to come with a lot of philanthropies and get with a unified taxonomy and ways to measure. So we all are bound by the same rules in terms of what is that resilience means really. How can you say that a forest or a person is more resilient after our interventions? It's not easy because it also requires a lot of effort over time. You won't see the benefits of interventions in probably 5, 10, 20 years. The other thing with climate adaptation is it's tough to measure the storm that didn't happen, or the infrastructure that did survive flood, for example. Or maybe the flood never happens, but you already invested in it. So there are a lot of nuances, but we try to measure in terms of how resilience have increased in nature and in people.
Interesting. Dario, tell us about one story on climate adaptation. Could be the project you have seen during your field visits that really impressed you or which gave you a lot of fulfillment.
Yes, I have several, but one that always impressed me is also the connection between climate and conflict. No, like we see, for example, in Syria, how because of the droughts, people are, first, these are regions that are very fragile in terms of conflict. No, and also because there's more droughts, there's more food and water scarcity, which also increase and exacerbate the reasons for conflict. No, because people not only are already in a historic situation of conflict and confrontation, but now because there's more competition for food and water, people, the spirits are high and the potential for conflict increases. And what inspired to me from that story is that with one of our partners, the International Rescue Committee, which by the way has traditionally worked on conflict settings, but now is also working on climate. We're working on identifying more resilient crops that could thrive in drought, with less rain. So you have rice, you have coffee crops that could be more resilient, and in turns that will make sure that in the future, at least food is one less cause for conflict, and that communities are more prepared, and that shortages of food are not going to be that related to climate. No? So that to me is one experience that deeply touched me because I was not aware of that connection between conflict, climate, and the fact that many crops, you probably know from your experience in fair trade, 50% of coffee crops, for example, are going to be gone by 2050. We don't do anything. So what are we going to do? And how is this going to trickle up to worldwide food shortages? So that's one story that resonates quite with me. The other one has been, in Guatemala, when working also with the same partner. How can they now working with Google and others? And this impressed me because I'm not a very technological guy, but I see how technology can also be a force for change. So now can they predict 6 months in advance when a flood or a climate event is going to hit a community, and they can even predict to which block, to which neighborhood is where it's going to hit harder, so that they can deploy much in advance what they call now anticipatory support. No, so to me that this was quite impressive, quite breakthrough. Maybe someone who's working on the field will say, "Well, this is usual," but to me as a layperson, this is quite impressive. Now you can predict many months in advance where a climate event is going to hit harder, and you can deploy support before, not after the fact.
Because you touched on technology, and obviously there's a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence, is AI making any impact on the corporate philanthropic sector?
We are starting to explore how. I think with AI, we have to be cautious that, yes, we want to jump into it. And at the same time, it's not a solution for everything. No, it's not a boilerplate like now AI does everything. But we do see efficiencies even in the processes that we do. So the way we do our due diligence, we can run them, and we have AI as a sounding board to tell us, okay, points of comparison, do analysis, etc. So we are starting. We are young in this. It probably is going to make things simpler. It's going to make things sharper in the way, the documents come out, the due diligence is done. But at the end of the day, there's no replacement yet as the human connection, going to the field, looking at the impact of the work that you're doing, or the lack of doing the learnings yourself. I mean, you still, us as humans, have to do the heavy lifting. So far, the experience with AI is promising. It's going to be a good way to simplify, to reduce time in, let's say, more procedural tasks, but the heavy lifting will still have to do, and the learning itself will have to be done by us, the humans.
Interesting. We talked a lot about climate change. Particularly keen to see how corporate philanthropy, the role it plays in addressing climate change, especially considering corporations' own environmental footprints. For example, amid all the great work you do, your parent company trades in oil. What are your views on that, and how do you handle such criticisms?
Well, it's indeed one element that comes across in different conversations that we have. That when we're talking about we work in climate resilience and adaptation, people feel it doesn't come as natural coming from a parent company that, as you said, trades in oil and mining and gas traditionally. What I can tell my own experience is one, companies like Trafigura and many of those like Trafigura are the ones who are costing also the innovations that will allow for the transition in the future. So there's a lot of investment that I see from the parent company in renewables, in renewable energy, hydrogen power, um, ammonia for fueling the ships, for example, the maritime traffic, etc. So there's this work that the company still does the core of the business, but there's a lot of work that is now being done investing in what's going to happen in the future. No, so I think that's an element of the commitment, but also an element of or a reality of the fact that probably the transition is going to come from the private sector, the innovation is going to come from the private sector, and that's a reality as well. That's one element. The other one is that to me it's so powerful that even with the different political changes and trends in the world right now, our parent company, our funder, has said we're going to stay the course. We're going to stay. Our corporate foundation is going to stay invest and continue investing in climate adaptation. They could have, easily changed to healthcare or education and pivot with the political changes in the last 20 and 12 months, but they were really committed. And when I had conversations with my board, they were like, we're going to continue because it's the right thing to do, because we work in low and middle income countries, because this is one of the most pressing needs that they have. And we need to work with the communities and preparing them for the effects of climate change. So to me, that's another element of when I go out and people ask these questions, I bring both. Yes, they acknowledge that the company, that our parent company is trading on oil and gas, but I also bring that element of, and they're also investing heavily on renewables and the essential minerals for the transition as well. That comes from companies from Trafigura that trades them, but also they maintain the commitment with the foundation in terms of keep working on climate. We're not going to pivot. We're not going to change. We're going to stay the course. To me, that's the real expression of the commitment. Yes, there's a contradiction, but there's also that commitment that proves that yes, as a group they are very committed, and we are as a philanthropy very committed with the topic.
The other transition or transformation we are seeing in the era we live in is ideas such as sustainable development are getting mainstream, are getting embedded into corporations' own operations rather than having a philanthropic arm. So I'm just wondering, what is the future of corporate philanthropy? Take the own example of Trafigura you shared. You said they are innovating behind hydrogen, ammonia, etc., which means that they are integrating low carbon models within their own business. So, what's the need for a philanthropy then?
Well, it's I think in my understanding of sustainability and ESG, the company itself works in its areas of influence. First, the company itself is a global corporate citizen, and what they're doing with the transition, etc., is responsible vision going forward. No, and the work itself on say doing good, improving life of the employees, their families, etc., is the social responsibility part that they do directly in the areas of influence. The philanthropy is separate. By law, we're Swiss philanthropy, where we should be and we are independent from our funder. So the work that we do is not. It might be complementary, but it doesn't duplicate or doesn't replace what the group does, what the Trafigura group does. So they, for example, I said, work on climate mitigation. They have developed, they're one of the biggest developers of the carbon markets in the world, in addition to investment in renewables, the investment of the essential minerals, whereas we're focusing exclusive on climate adaptation, which is complete. I mean, it's the other side of the climate discussion. No, it might be complementary, but it's the other side. So there's that space for corporate philanthropy to address those say market failures, to address these elements that are not related to the operations of the company, which to me are more part of the ESG sustainability work that they do. And we do have these deep conversations with our parent company quite a lot, because they also have their own sustainability team, their corporate affairs teams. So we always try to make sure that we don't duplicate their work, that we don't come across as doing the work of the company or the group, and that we stay separate. But at the same time, we tell them this is what we're doing, this is how our work might complement, even though it's independent, even though it's separate. No? So I believe there's a space for both still. And corporate philanthropy still is motivated by the purpose of doing good, to uh, as they said, say in the Swiss legislation, it's a selfless purpose. No, it's not driven by the profit. It's not driven by recognition. It's driven by you do good for the good of the world. So that's how we see the work of our philanthropy as well.
Hmm. How do you see the rising sentiment among some of the sections in the society that this entire climate is a hoax and scheme for certain causes and reasons? So,
Well, I mean, it's clear that climate is changing. That there's an and to me, this is my read of the science as well, not from IPC and others. It's clear that human activity is influencing climate. So we don't see it as a hoax, that we are fully dedicated to addressing it. No, and also our parent company is working on the mitigation side. So we know that this is a reality. I think what I think is equally interesting is that this transition is gradual. Many countries in the global south, in Latin America and Africa, they said, right now, mining, oil and gas, doing responsibly will finance the transition to a non-carbonized economy. So to me, the discussion is more, how sudden do you do that transition? For many, you have to do it overnight. But for many, it's also, even in the countries like Brazil, Colombia, African countries, doing it overnight will be unfair. No, it will not be fair and just, because you will then take out of these countries the main source of funding for education, for health, for future development. So to me, that's more of the conversation that I like to have. No, I don't think it's a hoax, and we don't entertain that idea of it's a hoax or is it true or not. We assume that is happening, and we assume that we have to reposition the world, and the world has to adapt towards it. No?
Dario, we're moving to the final section. I call it as how I did it. Every episode, I ask my guests the same set of questions. 3 questions. Being the one who worked in the organization you led, I know you're an incredible leader, so I'm particularly keen to understand your leadership philosophy using this opportunity. How do you manage differences of opinion? If someone comes to you and completely disagrees with your perspective, how do you approach that?
I approach it with curiosity and open mind, because I feel that the fact that I'm leading doesn't mean that I'm perfect or have all the answers. No, so I approach things with curiosity. If you're asking me how do I manage a divergent view, I will ask questions, open-ended questions, and I will approach and enter these conversations willing to be persuaded. But I would expect my counterpart, my colleague or my employee, to also have that kind of reciprocate on that kind of approach. To also be curious, to be willing to be persuaded. I think that's the best way to build a good conversation, and to build also a good understanding of what the issues are, even when you disagree with someone. At the end, I always believe is that you have to end the conversation with a decision. No, what cannot happen is that then disagreement, let things fester for a while, and then no decision is made, because no decision equals a decision. No, that's things undone. So my approach is, again, that approach things with curiosity, be willing to ask questions, but also push the counterpart to also be able to reciprocate, and open ask questions and be persuaded as well.
Impressive. What are 1 or 2 skills that are essentials for today's business leaders?
To me, the key skills are overall soft skills. Uh, you need to be able to listen, and have to be able to I think, reflect, to take a pause and not act impulsively, even though sometimes as a leader you have to make a decision quickly, no? But to me, the soft skills of being able to listen and be able to self-reflect are must have qualities that a leader now have to possess. Because otherwise, you're prone to make mistakes if you act too impulsively or if you're not willing to listen to others. It's impossible for a leader to have all the answers. And also, I think the third one, as a bonus, you have to acknowledge that sometimes you're going to make mistakes. So, how can you learn from those? I read recently, I think it was tennis player Federer, who said that he only hit 55% of his hits were successful, but it was that he was consistent in this 55%, and that he said, you can still fail 45% and still be the top in the world, because if you're consistent with the 55%, it's about that consistency, and that capacity to learn and to stay the course. And he was a very great player, so even if he fell, he will still stand up and continue, because even if we miss some of the hit 45%, he will still win the matches, no. So I think my reflection to that is, yes, you will probably fail some, but overall you will be successful. And what you need to do is stay the course, listen, be relentless.
Impressive. What is one book you recommend to our listeners?
I recommend two. So if you are
Sure.
practical and you're into management, in particular for new managers, and I don't remember the name of the author, but it's about the first 90 days. It's a Harvard professor from Harvard Law School, and I don't remember his name right now. I'm sorry. But it's so important it's not about the 90 days per se, but it's more about how you get into a new role, or if you are promoted into, we're in the same role, but you're promoted, what kind of things you need to consider. It's not about, many people talk about, the low hanging fruits and the early wins, etc. It's not about that. It's how you deploy yourself. How do you identify who's doing what? How do you have conversations? I think that's one. And the other one is leadership without easy answers, from Professor Heifetz from Harvard, which is about adaptive leadership. And there's a lot of great stories there, and there's a lot of elements of how do you lead change in organizations. And he's a psychiatrist, he's a doctor, so it comes from more of the practice and observation of medicine, and how that also trickles into leadership. So to me, this is like a must read kind of approach.
Lovely. Great books. Dario, that takes us to the end of this interview. And such a delight to connect with you in this avatar and asking you these questions. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your valuable
Thank
perspectives
you very
today.
much, Senthil. Thank you. So it was such a pleasure.
Lovely. That was Dario Soto-Abril sharing insights on how corporate philanthropy can build a more sustainable and equitable future. You've been listening to Business and Society podcast, where we explore diverse ideas about business and society with leading thinkers and practitioners. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen and share it with someone interested in the intersection of business, purpose, and impact. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.